My dear friends, today we celebrate the third Sunday of Lent in year C. Today's readings show how God's interest is not in condemning us, but rather in saving us. The first reading, taken from the book of Exodus, gives us the famous narrative of the burning bush, a pivotal moment that not only alters Moses' destiny, but also sets the course for Israel's liberation from Egypt. Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro near Mount Horeb, encounters a bush engulfed in flames, yet not consumed. This extraordinary sight captures his attention, leading him to investigate. As Moses approaches, God calls him by name, emphasizing a personal relationship and divine awareness of individual identity. Moses' response, "Here I am," signifies his readiness to engage with the divine. God instructs Moses to remove his sandals, declaring the ground holy, and introduces himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, connecting the present moment to the ancestral covenant and affirming his enduring faithfulness. God expresses his deep awareness of Israel's suffering in Egypt and announces his intention to deliver them. This reveals a God who is not distant but intimately concerned with human affliction and one who desires for their liberation and flourishing. He commissions Moses to confront Pharaoh and lead the Israelites out of bondage. God's assurance, "I will be with you," highlights that divine missions are not accomplished by human strength alone, but through God's empowering presence. Anticipating the Israelites' inquiry about God's identity, Moses asks for his name. God responds with, "I am who I am." This name, often rendered as Yahweh, conveys God's self-existence, eternal presence, and unchanging nature. It signifies that God is the ultimate reality, independent of all else, and is consistently present with his people. It challenges believers to trust in God's eternal presence and sovereignty, even when his ways are beyond human understanding. God often utilizes the extraordinary within the ordinary to draw us closer, inviting us to recognize his presence in our daily lives. Moses' encounter occurs during routine tasks, reminding us that God can reveal himself in everyday moments. Therefore, we are challenged to be attentive to the divine in the mundane ordinariness of our lives, to have a profound spiritual experience. In the second reading, taken from St. Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, Paul reminds the Corinthians of the experiences of the Israelites in the wilderness, using them as a warning against complacency and sin. He draws a parallel between the blessings received by the Israelites and those enjoyed by Christians, emphasizing that spiritual privileges do not guarantee salvation if they are not accompanied by faithful obedience. Paul recounts how all the Israelites that passed through the Red Sea were guided by the cloud and ate the manna and drank from the spiritual rock, which he identifies as Christ. Despite these blessings, many fell into sin and faced God's judgment. This serves as a sobering reminder that participation in religious rituals does not automatically lead to righteousness. He specifically warns against grumbling and presumption. The Israelites' complaints against God led to their downfall, showing that ingratitude and disobedience can have serious consequences. Paul exhorts the Corinthians to learn from these examples and to remain vigilant. Towards the end, he warns against overconfidence in one's spiritual state, reminding believers that pride and self reliance can lead to downfall. This passage challenges us to examine our own spiritual journey. Like the Israelites, we may receive abundant blessings, but are we truly living in obedience to God? It is easy to assume that outward participation in faith is enough, but Paul reminds us that what matters is a heart that remains faithful and humble before God. Furthermore, grumbling reflects a lack of faith and gratitude, leading us away from trust in God's plan. How often do we complain about our circumstances rather than trust in God's providence? Spiritual pride can be dangerous. Thinking we are strong can make us careless. Instead, we are called to rely fully on God's grace, remaining humble and watchful. True security comes not from our own strength, but from dependence on Christ, our spiritual rock. The gospel taken from Luke refers to two events that were probably familiar to the ancient audience. The details, however, have been lost to time. The gruesome mention of Pilate's mingling the blood of Galileans with their sacrifices appears to refer to a massacre of a group of Galilean pilgrims in Jerusalem. The narrative does not reveal why Pilate slaughtered these people, but the deed nevertheless corresponds with what other historical writings tell about Pilate's penchant for brutality. In the second incident, Jesus refers to a tower in the wall around Jerusalem when he speaks of the Tower of Siloam. Apparently, a structure collapsed without warning and crushed 18 hapless Jerusalemites. Both these calamities would have been the subjects of recent conversation which saw innocent people losing their lives. And it was common for the Jews to attribute disaster directly to sins. Jesus' response, however, implies that we must not equate tragedy with divine punishment. Sin does not make atrocities happen, they just happen. He then shifts the conversation from the whys of life to the hows of life. He speaks about repentance and emphasizes the suddenness with which this death comes through the parable of the fig tree. The three entities in the story all have clear symbolic significance. The vineyard owner represents God, the one who rightly expects to see fruit on his tree and who justly decides to destroy it when he finds none. The gardener or vineyard keeper who cares for the trees, watering and fertilizing them to bring them to their peak of fruitfulness, represents Jesus, who feeds his people and gives them living water. The tree itself has two symbolic meanings: the nation of Israel and the individual. The compassionate gardener intercedes for more time to water and fertilize the fruitless tree, and the gracious Lord of the vineyard responds in patience. The tree has not been left to its own devices. Everything possible is being done to get it to act as it should. Correspondingly, God does not leave people to their own resources but encourages their repentance. The 3-year period is significant because it is generally accepted that Jesus' public ministry lasted for 3 years, but the fruits of repentance were not forthcoming. In the parable, the vineyard owner grants another year of life to the tree. In the same way, God in His mercy grants us another day, another hour, another breath. Christ stands at the door of each man's heart, knocking and seeking to gain entrance and requiring repentance from sin. A cultivated yet unproductive tree may continue to live even without bearing fruit only because it has been granted additional time to do what it is supposed to do. Unless it begins to bear fruit, which refers to repentance, the result will be its just and swift destruction. Today's gospel invites us to rid ourselves of the false notion that good things only happen to good people and bad things only happen to bad people. We see good things happen to bad people all the time. We see bad things happen to good people all the time. Calamities, sicknesses, and disasters are not to be understood as punishments from God. For God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through Him. It is not God's desire to destroy us. We are all sinners equally and deserve punishment, yet that's not what God is interested in. He's interested in our repentance. Tragedies should teach us that since death and judgment are imminent, we need to be ready through true repentance. In the middle of the season of Lent, it's good to look back at how we started off on Ash Wednesday and take stock if we are progressing towards what we decided to do, or we have slowly begun to drift away. Are we bearing fruit? May God bless us all.